Freshly moved from Joel Embiid receiving 0 minutes in the most recent Team USA game, another Sixers member spoke about his frustrations with the program. Paul George feels he was snubbed from Team USA after seemingly having the belief that he would participate in this year's Olympics. Now, granted, I was a little surprised to see these quotes come out. I'm not going to sit here and stand up and pound the table that Paul George remains a top 12 player in the NBA. But when Paul George did tell his side of the story, I was a little bit surprised by how things went down and do think he has a little bit of a case to be upset here. So to dive into what he said on the 7 p.m. in Brooklyn podcast with Carmelo Anthony, I want to start with the quote that he said with Steve Kerr. He was asked the question about was he interested in participating in Team USA, and Paul George said yes, and recalled kind of the storyline that led up to it. And this article kind of transcribes it, saying, recalling a conversation with Golden State Warriors and Team USA basketball head coach Steve Kerr, George said, quote, Steve Kerr came up to me right after we played the Warriors in LA and was like, you got any interest in being in Team USA? Hell yeah. So I'm thinking I'm like part of that group. So fast forward, my group, Aaron Mintz and them, reach out to Team USA, talk to Grant Hill, and inform them that if I finish the season healthy, then hell yeah, I want to play. So we told Team USA that I wanted to be in. So I do see why he was under the belief with that type of conversation. And then Paul George expands on things to speak about his comments with Grant Hill, where he really found out. He was like, I'm seeing all the posts on social media, seeing these guys announcing their jerseys, and I have heard nothing from your end. And we got that angle as well. And he says, quote, it just so happened that I ran into Grant Hill during the playoffs in Dallas, George said. He was like, yeah, man, it just didn't happen this year. I understood it. Like, I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to be sorry about it. But at the same time, I was like, damn, I was looking forward to representing the USA and being a part of that team. Having gone through it already, it was a blast, and I learned so much. I feel like I grew as a player from the process. So I wouldn't say it hurt, but I for sure wanted to do it. So I do feel for Paul to an extent here. We do know that he has represented Team USA in the Olympics and on the biggest stage before. Also got one of the most gruesome injuries that I can remember in my lifetime during that Team USA Olympics. So kind of glad that that is not at risk for Paul George. But I do think it is a different point at his career. And they do make some decent points on both sides of things. For starters, let's acknowledge what a great year that Paul George is coming off. That 22.6 points per game, 5.2 rebounds, 3.5 assists, shot 47.1% from the floor, 41.3% from three on high volume there, 45.7% from the corner overall. And that's one of the points that I will stick up for with Paul George. Is one of the things we're seeing with Team USA is, yes, they are the most talented team in the world, but it has not just been about talent. That it's clear that this Team USA has put some thought process into actually constructing a basketball team. Guys that can play with each other, play off each other, and well-round check every box. This isn't just the 12 best players in the world. This is bringing in guys like Derek White, like Drew Holiday, who are necessary to be connective pieces, can link up those star players together and do the dirty work, do the little things. And with Paul George, well, I wouldn't consider him a dirty work or nitty-gritty guy. What he is, a guy, is he can be very effective without needing to be ball dominant. That he would have been very comfortable just being a floor spacer, a guy that can be a little bit of a 3-and-D type role, which seems kind of crazy to throw in his direction considering all that he's done in his career. But when you put in the context of how talented this group is and how many other options there are, I could see a world where he fit in with that. And the health, by the way, is a real factor that he should be looking into and the team should have discussed. That, yes, he did come off a season in which he played 74 games, but when you do look back at the track record of Paul George, just 56 the season before, 31 before that, 54 before that, and 48 before that. So when you zoom out over the 5-year period, this is really the only season that he's coming off in which Paul George has been able to suit up on a just about night-to-night basis. So I do understand the concern from Team USA there. And once again, just to highlight that those three-point numbers there, that's pretty ridiculous stuff there. That 8.8 three-point attempts per game this season, connecting at that type of level, that's some really impressive stuff. Or that is the 2-point attempt number. 7.9 three-point attempts per game this season, connecting at a 41.3% rate. And over the length of his career, that pretty much stands up. That 38.5% from his career on 6.8 attempts per game. That type of three-point volume, I do think, could have been helpful on this Team USA. Obviously, they have a ton of guys that shooters, but I don't think Paul George would be a guy that would have been disruptive to this roster. So I do understand if you wanted to go that direction, that would have made sense. Now, granted, there's already a squeeze for minutes. That we're seeing plenty of guys really get their minutes cut, and freshly off Joel Embiid being the guy that most recently had to receive this opportunity. There's no need to dive into Joel's resume. I have a separate video kind of speaking on this overall situation, my frustrations that as the only true center on roster, I do think he still deserves some clock, but the bottom line is this is the way things go. That Jason Tatum, also a guy that has received the short end of that same stick. Tyrese Halliburton, the same story there. So there is a lot of talent on this Team USA roster, and rightfully so. That this team is going for gold. That is the standard, and it is clear that they are playing with a purpose this year, that this is one of the Olympics in which the Avengers have assembled and they're ready to lock in and take down the rest of the world. Now, with the Paul George conversation, it's always been a little bit interesting to me that he does seem to be a guy that is viewed in much higher light by his peers than I think he is in the national media. And to kind of touch on a little bit of that there, we had a bunch of these quotes coming out during the year talking about how Paul George is a model for the new generation of NBA players and NBA 2K gamers alike. Awesome article here that was put out. I'm sorry I always butcher his name, but Young Minsky or something along those lines. Awesome Clippers follow on Twitter and writer there, but a great article that he dove into. And one of the guys who's been at kind of the forefront of the conversation has been Brandon Miller, that he's called Paul George his GOAT, and he kind of was asked to dive deeper about it into this article that he writes, "It's no secret that Charlotte Hornets star rookie Brandon Miller has modeled his game after Paul George, even calling him his own personal GOAT before last summer's NBA draft. But there's a specific reason why George is the archetype for Miller. Quote, it's kind of how the league is built now. Paul George is the right person to study for this generation. Former NBA superstar Carmelo Anthony agreed. Quote, you're talking about the mold of George's size. He can handle, he can shoot, a sniper, a killer. Why do you think a lot of kids today are talking about PG? It's no disrespect to nobody. That's the mold of when you create your player on 2K. And I do think that's a great way to put it there. That when you think about like these stars of today, that unfortunately not everyone's going to have the physical tools of LeBron James or be 7'2" like Joel Embiid. That Paul George, he is kind of that clean, just exactly what you picture in a basketball player, and that's why I do think he's received a great deal of disrespect. And to Paul George, a huge credit to him, because the final product, the polished player that he looks like right now, was not the guy that he once came into the NBA. Coming out of Fresno State, there was still a lot of rawness in his game, that he's kind of built the smoothness in himself. And even those early days in Indiana, that he was closer to this 3-and-D type archetype player than what he has been now. That he's figured out a way to really maximize his abilities and master this style of ball that really has become widespread across the NBA. So I do think that is worth noting there, and kind of cool that how much like his presence or influence has rubbed off on this generation. And he really is a player that I think like came in the perfect time for the way the league was trending, and ultimately that's why we're seeing a great deal of his success in this league. And I will say, from a Sixers perspective, it would have been cool to watch him playing Team USA, especially given the fact that Joel Embiid is out there. That it is clear that these guys are going to have to figure out how to share the rock, how to play this balanced style of team ball with all the talent that they do have. And for Paul George specifically, he's very, very well aware of that. That on the same podcast with Carmelo Anthony, once again, the 7 p.m. in Brooklyn podcast, he said, quote, I never hooped with a caliber of player like Joel. Also spoke on the team as a whole. And that is one of the great things about Paul George there, that he is so malleable in his ability. He is a guy who can do just about everything on the floor, can kind of phase up or down from a role perspective for what he can do. And obviously he would be asked to do much more and will be asked to do much more on the Sixers than would be the case with a guy with a team like Team USA. Now, granted, I do also think that's a great point that we're at this portion of Paul George's career. I spoke on the injuries and the lack of games. This is going to work for both sides, with Joel Embiid and with Paul George, that hopefully this can be a story which each guys can have their nights in which they can step up, be a little bit of that primary option. And let's not forget about Tyrese Maxey, that is going to consistently be that co-star and even number one star on certain night occasions. So that is the hope. That is the philosophy for this Sixers team. And these guys can kind of build off each other and have their nights and survive the regular season and hopefully go in for a healthy playoffs. It is a roll of dice with the injury risk. We know that is the case with both of these guys, with Paul George and with Joel, just as it was the case with Kawhi and Paul George, and that it was the shortcomings in Los Angeles, that it really never came down to the talent angle for either one of these guys. It was the availability angle that really hurt that franchise. So hopefully better luck here in Philadelphia. I do feel for Paul George. I do wish he got the opportunity on the biggest stage, but hopefully there's some extended basketball expected to be played in Philadelphia with some very big stakes at risk as well. So we'll see what happens from here. I understand for Paul George, feel a little bit bad for him, but ultimately I don't think this is something to get super up in arms about. But ultimately, a lot of ball left to be played for Paul George, the Sixers, and everyone else. Appreciate you guys listening to this video. If you have not already, please drop a subscribe on the channel. I'm going to be cranking out Sixers content and news on a daily basis from here on out. So make sure you're smashing that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video, dropping your comments below, and I'll talk to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.